Hi everyone, I am here with a true story. This one is called Breaking the Cycle, and it is by Mary Guess. Sorry, just down a bit. I was born and raised in the small town of Brazil, Indiana. My father was in and out of prison for most of my childhood, since he was the town thief. My mother, brother, sisters, and I were living on welfare and dealing with all the stigma attached to our situation. My mother was an angry, violent, and confused woman. It wasn't until later that I found out both she and my dad were victims of their parents' abuse. My mother told me that she loved me, but her actions didn't show love. If my siblings did something wrong, she blamed me. I was the eldest after all. She beat me on a regular basis. I even got a lashing if I didn't move fast enough for her. I always wondered, do other mothers treat their children this way? I often stayed away from home. My mother would have me beg the neighbors or go to nearby family members for food or money. I didn't like begging, so at 10 years old, when most little girls should be playing with dolls, I started mowing yards, raking leaves, babysitting, working 2 paper routes to buy necessities for my family. I grew up fast. There were still countless times when we would be painfully hungry, when a bag of groceries would miraculously appear on our doorstep. Even at 10, I felt God had his hands on my life. When I was a freshman in high school, my grandfather's stepson, a senior named Sean, asked me to the prom. I wasn't sure why he asked me. Only the popular freshman girls got asked to go. No one had ever asked me on a date. It was a small town. My dad was in prison, and I was a welfare kid. So this was a big deal. And strangely, my mom let me go. Sean's sister Kelly took me to a beauty salon where the stylist put my long brown hair into an updo and dressed me up in a beautiful sky blue formal gown. I felt like a princess. But things took a dark turn. Looking back, I am grateful we had made it a double date with Kelly and her boyfriend, because on the way home, Sean tried to rape me in the back seat of the car, with Kelly and her boyfriend right there in the front. If Kelly hadn't stopped him, by God's mercy, I would have been raped that night. I was scared to death. When I got home, I went right to bed and cried. Traditionally, the day after prom, everyone went on a picnic. Sean showed up at my door to take me, but I refused to get out of bed. Even after I told my mom what had happened that night before, she insisted I go. She was concerned about Sean's feelings being hurt, that he would be embarrassed if I didn't go with him. But I determined not to move from my bed. As I lay there, my mom began to beat me. She pulled my hair, trying to yank me from the bed. Somehow she couldn't move me. All the while, Sean was waiting outside. So much for loving me, Mom, I thought. Yet the beating didn't hurt as much as her calling me stupid, telling me that no one would ever love me, and not protecting me from a potentially terrible situation. I'd had it. I was so hurt and angry that I promised myself I would leave home as soon as I could manage my own, and I would never get married and have children. One day, when I was spending time in prayer with the Lord, I asked him, "Where were you when Sean was outside and my mom was beating me?" "Mary, I was right there with you," I felt him say. "I was holding you on the bed. That's why your mom couldn't move you. Your mother chose to be angry and violent because that is what she knew. but I chose to protect you from things far worse than her anger. And then I felt him say to me, "Trust me, Mary, and follow me. I will take you on a journey of change, choices, and victory." 2 years later, as I was nearing my 16th birthday, my dad had served his time in prison and come home. He'd found a job and started working. One day he came home from work and told me that a nice young man was coming over to take me on a date Friday night, and that I should be ready to go by 6 o'clock. I made a point to refuse, but he wouldn't hear of it. Little did I know, God was working a miracle. Before this time, I'd been praying for God to send someone to love me. At lunchtime at school, 2 friends and I would sit in the balcony, sometimes pointing out boys we would date. One day I pointed to a boy and said, "If I was really desperate, I would go out with that guy." I thought I was so funny. Well, the laugh was on me. It was that boy who showed up on my doorstep on Friday night. His name was Mike, and we soon began dating. While we were dating, my dad messed up again and was sent back to prison. I was sure that Mike wouldn't want to take me out anymore, and that his family wouldn't approve of me. After I told Mike about my dad, his response was, "I am in love with you, Mary, not your family." Does God answer prayer? Absolutely. And so began my journey of redemption. Despite my promise to myself that I would never marry, Mike and I married 2 years later. And despite my promise that I would never have children, and the doctors telling us that we would probably never be able to, we have 4 beautiful children: David, Mark, Michelle, and Bethany. My relationship with the Lord continued to deepen, and He has helped me raise my wonderful children. Of course, now I know the source of love is Jesus. I continued to have a cordial relationship with my mom. She called on me many times for help, and I knew the Lord wanted me to be respectful to her and to care for her. But there was still a lot of hurt between us, and it wasn't until her father's funeral that I began to truly understand why. At the funeral, my mom confessed to me that my grandfather had sexually molested her from the time she was 3 years old until she married my dad at the age of 18. I wanted to vomit. My heart broke for her and what she'd been through because of him. It explained her anger. But then my mind went to a different place. She'd left my sister and me in his care many times. How could she have done that? I screamed inside. Yet I couldn't remember a time when he had ever harmed me. If he had, the Lord erased it from my memory. Still, this was very, very difficult for me to forgive. I wanted my mom to tell me she was sorry for how she treated me during my childhood. Instead, she looked at me and said that she'd done the best she could to raise me. Ouch, that was hurtful. My heart was broken. Although my mother never apologized for her abuse, I learned that whether she asked for my forgiveness or not, forgiving her gave my heart permission to heal. I learned that although forgiving her didn't make her actions right, it allowed me to be free of bearing the burden of them in my life. The Lord helped me forgive my mother, and in the process, He took away the hurt I felt over my childhood so I could move on in my journey. I realized that I had suffered from abuse because my parents had suffered from abuse, and they suffered from abuse because their parents suffered from abuse. It was a cycle that needed to stop with my family and me. I pledged to be the opposite of my mom, both as a wife and as a mother to my children. I was very involved in my children's lives, cherishing every moment with them and loving them deeply. Each one grew up thinking he or she was my favorite. One day, while I was driving, my daughter Bethany, a senior in high school at the time, sent me a text message. I pulled over to see that she had simply written, "I love you, Mom." Bethany had said she loved me 1,000 times, but in that moment I felt God say to me, "Mary, the cycle has been broken." I knew exactly what he meant. I wept tears of joy, and I praised the one who can heal all wounds. Jesus didn't promise us a painless life, but with God's help, you and I can choose to not pass on the generational abuses of those before us. With his redeeming love and power, we can have a journey of change, choices, and victory. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Isaiah 43:18 and 19. Good night, guys.